Discussion last week was awesome. Like, it was so rich, and all week long I've been thinking and processing about the things that people brought up. I've been wondering and pondering about the process that we go through to try to learn how to trust that intuition or those spirit nudgings. How do we learn to trust those things that are leading us toward what is creative and life-giving? How is it that we nurture this ability to trust the wisdom that seems to stem from the deepest part of who we are? I've been thinking this week about Mark's horse and about how sometimes we pray and we wait and we long for something, and then we get it, but then we discern that perhaps that dream wasn't for us. I've also been thinking about Shannon's discernment of going to seminary and getting there, and then through deep listening, realizing that this maybe there was another path that was calling to her. I think these are such beautiful examples of learning how to trust. Because this sign business, this discernment business, isn't an exact science. There isn't like a step-by-step program that we can hand out and offer people so that they know exactly how to get to this discernment. I kind of wonder if the way that we learn how to trust is kind of the way that we learn how to do all kinds of things, by putting ourselves out there just a little bit, by dipping our toe in and testing the waters, and then by paying attention to where we are and learning from the joy as well as the bumps and bruises along the way. Nothing is wrong, nothing is wasted, particularly if we pay attention to all of it and we allow it to be the experience that teaches us and helps us to learn. This learning to trust the deepest parts of ourselves seems to involve leaning in. To learn, we have to engage, and then we also have to remain open and receptive to the movement of the Spirit. So when I had sketched out the trajectory of this series, I had a plan. But after last week's discussion, it was so enriching, and I just felt like as I sat down to start writing for this week, I thought that's not the right way to go. I knew I needed to go a different direction. I had planned for a different sign as our metaphor for today, but the sign that just kept coming to me over and over again was slow down. So after stumbling for a scripture this week, knowing that the previous plan that I had in mind just wasn't the right thing, but then wondering and wandering and stumbling around trying to decide to find it when I didn't even know what it that I was looking for, I remembered this little passage from Jeremiah. Stop at the crossroads and look around. Ask for the ancient paths. Where is the good way? Then walk in it and find a resting place for yourself. Wow. I wish that I could take credit for this brilliance, because really that just fits right in with what we've been doing. The first week we stood at a crossroads. We looked at how we might be headed towards that intersection where our deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. And then look around. Last week we used the railroad crossing sign as a metaphor to discern how we can discern between what is anxiety and what is intuition. To slow down and to look around and decide if something is really, truly a legitimate danger, or if it is that FEAR, false evidence appearing real, that we kind of need to lean into and move through in order to get where it is we need to go. So it's really funny that ever since Sunday, I could sense that the sign metaphor for this week was slow. And I knew that I had to scrap what I had in mind previously. And then I went about this week scrambling frantically, trying to write a message or figure out what on earth I was going to say about slowing down. Moses, smell the roses. I discerned that the message was slow down and just be right here, and then I proceeded to scramble. Sometimes I wonder when I'm writing if I'm writing just for myself. So if this is one of those times where this is all just what for me, I'm really sorry for dragging you through my processing. In the passage from Jeremiah today, God says, stand still, look around, ask for the ancient path, ask where is the good way. So when I finally realized that perhaps slow down was not just the message that I was supposed to deliver today, but it was actually the message that I was supposed to receive and embody throughout the week, I took my Bible and my journal outside into the sunshine, and I allowed myself to just settle in and to listen to the breeze rustling through the treetops and to watch the leaves dance through the air on their graceful descent to the ground. I took a breath, and then another, and I allowed myself to just be still, to look around and to ponder just this one verse. Letting whatever questions came emerge, I wondered, what are the ancient paths? What would an ancient path look like? So as I was thinking about this, I was guessing that it probably was not an expressway. I imagined that the pace of the ancient path would be much slower than the pace that we are used to keeping. On the ancient path, I assume that communication was not expected to be instantaneous, and that we would not be surrounded by all kinds of distractions, and that we may not expect to find every answer to every burning question at the speed of Google. I expect also that on an ancient path, we wouldn't maybe have the world in the palm of our hands and be able to transport ourselves wherever we wanted to go, anywhere, at any moment, which oftentimes means that we're not here, which kind of means that we're oftentimes nowhere. I imagine that the ancient path might look worn and tried and true. I imagine that an ancient path would be soaked with wisdom, and that if we were not rushing about on this ancient path, we might just have the ability to soak in a little bit of that ancient wisdom for ourselves. And then, as we are soaking in this wisdom on this ancient path, the question that we are to engage is, where is the good way? Just because a lot of people have gone some way before doesn't mean that that's a good way. I was reminded of Jesus' words in Matthew, "Go through the narrow gate. The gate that leads to destruction is broad and the road is wide, so many people enter through it. But the gate that leads to life is narrow and the road is difficult, so few people find it." When we slow down and look around and consider the ancient wisdom and we discern the good way, then we are to walk in it and we will find rest. Walking in the good way leads to rest. That was another treasure this week. The good way leads us to rest and not to rush. Of course it does. That only makes sense. But this is so countercultural. I think that rest and silence and slow might just be that narrow path in our culture. We are a culture of rush and not of rest. When I was looking around online this week, I found that in 1967, some experts on time management delivered a report to the U.S. Senate presenting some of the things that they were really concerned about. They were concerned about the impact of technology and satellites and robotics on the American workplace. What would that mean for the American worker? What problem do you suppose that they were most concerned about? Do you have any idea? That's good. But the concern that they had was that Americans in the future would have too much free time on their hands. Like, we just weren't going to know what to do with ourselves. All this technology was going to do all kinds of amazing things, and we were going to have to figure out how on earth would we fill our time. They concluded that by 1985, people might have to choose between working a 22-hour week, 27 weeks a year, or retiring at 38. Oh, sometimes experts don't get it right. Now, over 50 years later, the pace of life is moving faster than ever. Technology has only accelerated that pace. We are obsessed with being busy and getting things done quickly. Our pace is out of control. So, this little gem from Jeremiah today comes in the middle of a long warning. Here's what is headed your way if you continue on the path that you are on. And it isn't pretty. It involves the destruction of Jerusalem, of life and promise as they had known it. So, as kind of the logistics coordinator of a family that seems to be moving in about a zillion different directions, as a wannabe contemplative who struggles to sit still, I sense that this slow down is exactly what I need most. And yet, it is elusive. It's something that I struggle with so much. Discernment would be a lot easier, I think, if it was about choosing the good from the bad. But a lot of time, that's not what discernment is. It has a lot more to do with choosing the best good in a field of all kinds of other good options. And the rush that are in often makes this discernment process all the more difficult. The ancient paths that lead to the good way allow us to find rest for our weary souls. Thinking about the pace of life and our spiritual journey this week, I thought of the phrase Godspeed, and how oftentimes we might say to someone, Godspeed, and it's almost like a prayer for a quick response, for a blessing from God to come quickly, or for God to intervene quickly with healing or to end suffering. Godspeed. The phrase had me pondering, what actually is the speed of God? As I was pondering this, I stumbled upon a short film that's actually called Godspeed, The Pace of Being Known. It's a beautiful little film that has really pretty footage from Scotland, from a village in Scotland. And I've added a link in the Bible app to the film if you're interested in watching it. But if you want to, you might want to save that now so that you can get to it again. Anyway, in the film Godspeed, The Pace of Being Known, Pastor Matt Canlin remembers when he was a seminary graduate and he was just ready, like he was ready to take on the world for Christ. A wise mentor of his said that he thought he still had a few things to learn and that in order to learn them, he might need to travel outside of the U.S. And so Matt and his wife found themselves called to move to St. Andrew's Parish in Scotland. Now Matt was just out of seminary, and he was ready to run. He was full of ideas. He had deep theological thoughts that he just couldn't wait to share with people, and he was ready to bring the gospel to people. But instead, the community he discovered, the places and the people that he had an opportunity to get to know deeply and intimately, to love, taught him. Because the pace of their village life was so vastly different from the scurry of the American city that he had come from, this community slowed him down and taught him to see the gospel with entirely new eyes. Matt learned to walk instead of run along the roads winding through the countryside. He learned literally to walk the ancient paths that people had walked for centuries. And through his encounters along the way with the land and the people, he found the very thing that he had first assumed he had been sent there to bring. In this film, they reference a book that was written in 1980 by Kosuke Koyama, a theologian and professor from Union Theological Seminary in New York. And this book has a really intriguing title. It is called 3 Mile an Hour God. Now, 3 miles an hour is about the approximate speed that people walk. And Jesus walked throughout his ministry, through Galilee, through the streets of Jerusalem, walking. Jesus experienced the world, encountered his neighbors at 3 miles an hour. Now, when you're moving at 3 miles an hour, you are able to see much more than when you are speeding along on the expressway. This walking ministry of Jesus points to a God who prefers depth over distance, where relationships that are formed along the way are what are valued. In the book 3 Mile an Hour God, Koyama writes, God walks slowly because God is love. If God is not love, God would have gone much faster. Love has its speed. It is an inner speed. It is a spiritual speed. It's a different kind of speed from the theological speed to which we are accustomed. It is slow, and yet is Lord over all other speeds, because it is the speed of love. It goes on in the depth of our lives, whether we notice it or not, whether we are currently hit by storm or not, at 3 miles an hour. So we're used to driving around in our cars, and our cars allow us to move through the world at a pace where it's easy to just not notice what's around us. In the film, Matt commented that our 21st century culture could be called a tourist generation, that we avoid being known because we always keep ourselves on the go, which means that we are living a totally different kind of life than Jesus led, and different from humans throughout most of history. And this is to our detriment. It takes longer to notice and see people's virtues than it does to see their flaws. And at our breakneck pace, we miss out on so much. Slowing down helps us to learn by going deeper rather than by chasing the novelty of what is new. Koyama imagines a 3 mile an hour God, but how often do we just wish that God would travel alongside of us at 70 miles an hour? We desire for God to move at the pace that we are moving, but instead it seems as if we may need to slow down in order to catch up with God, which is very counterintuitive. We say God's speed and we hope for resolution and healing and redemption to all come quickly. Maybe the speed of God is 3 miles an hour. And if we slow down in order to catch up with God, we will better know each other and know ourselves and better know God. If we truly want to know God and our neighbors, and we also truly desire to be known, we're going to have to slow down. So, pondering again, if God is a 3 mile an hour God, what does it mean to live at God's speed in the crazy pace of our 21st century American culture? The Lord proclaims, stop at the crossroads and look around. Ask for the ancient paths. Where is the good way? Then walk in it and find a resting place for yourselves.